Disclaimer. This book may contain content that is considered historically inaccurate or culturally insensitive by modern standards. My hope is that by exploring old literature, we will better understand why people of the past thought the way that they did and understand the influences that shape their culture. This video is not intended for young audiences. Content warning for punishments in camp. This chapter contains glorification of war, cruel and unusual punishments, as well as touches of racism. Please listen at your own risk. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I will be reading from Out of Door Book, which is the 7th book in a collection or series of books called The Children's Hour, published by Houghton Mifflin Co. in 1907. Punishments in Camp by Harry M. Kieffer. Among all civilized nations, the rules of war seem to have been written with an iron hand. The laws by which the soldier in the field is governed are of necessity inexorable, for strict discipline is the chief excellence of an army, and a ready obedience the chief virtue of the soldier. Nothing can be more admirable in the character of the true soldier than his prompt and unquestioning response to the trumpet call of duty. The world can never forget, nor ever sufficiently admire, Leonidas, with his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, the Roman soldier on guard at the gates of the perishing Pompeii, or the gallant 600 charging into the valley of death at Balaclava. Disobedience to orders is the great sin of the soldier, and one that is sure to be punished, for at no other time does justice wear so stern and severe a look as when she sits enthroned amidst the camps of armed men. In different sections of the army, various expedients were resorted to for the purpose of correcting minor offenses. What particular shape the punishment should assume depended very much upon the inventive faculty of the field and staff, or of such offices as of such officers of the line as might have charge of the case. Before taking the field, a few citizen sneak thieves were discovered prowling amongst the tents. These were promptly drummed out of camp to the tune of the Rogue's March, the whole regiment shouting in derision as the miserable fellows took to their heels when the procession reached the limits of the camp, where they were told to be gone and never show their faces in camp any more, on pain of a more severe treatment. If, as very seldom happened, it was an enlisted man who was caught stealing, he was often punished in the following way. A barrel, having one end knocked out and a hole in the other large enough to allow one's head to go through, was slipped over the culprit's shoulders. On the outside of the barrel the word thief was printed in large letters. In this dress he presented the ludicrous appearance of an animated meal barrel, for you could see nothing of him but his head and legs, his hands being very significantly confined. Sometimes he was obliged to stand or sit, as best he could, about the guardhouse, or near by the colonel's quarters, all day long. At other times he was compelled to march through the company streets and make the tour of the camp under guard. Once in the field, however, sneak thieves soon disappeared, nor was there frequent occasion to punish the men for any other offenses. Nearly, if not quite all of the punishments inflicted in the field were for disobedience in some form or other. Not that the men were wilfully disobedient. Far from it. They knew very well that they must obey, and that the value of their services was measured wholly by the quality of their obedience. It very rarely happened, even amid the greatest fatigue after a hard day's march, or in the face of the most imminent danger, that any one refused his duty. But after a long and severe march, a man is so completely exhausted that he is likely to become irritable, and to manifest a temper quite foreign to his usual habit. He is then not himself, and may in such circumstances do what at other times he would not think of doing. Thus it once happened in my own company that one of the boys who took it into his head to go over the traces. We had a long, hot day's march through Maryland on the way down from Gettysburg, and were quite worn out. About midnight we halted in a clover field on a hillside for rest and sleep. Corporal Harder, who was the only officer, commissioned or non-commissioned, that we had left to us after Gettysburg, called out, "John D., report to the adjutant for camp guard." Now John, who was a German, by the way, did not like the prospect of losing his sleep, and had to be summoned a second time before replying, "Corporal, it should lose this net." "Corporal, I won't do it." Tired though we all were, we could not help laughing at the preposterous idea of a man daring to disobey the corporal, as the boys jerked off their accoutrements and began to spread down their gum blankets on the fragrant clover. What with the dew, they were greatly amused at this singular passage between John and the corporal. Oh, there is an illustration here. It says, drummed out of camp to the tune of the Rogue's March. And it is an illustration of that. Come on, John, don't make a Dutch dance for yourself. You know you must go. Ich hab dir gesagt, ich dus es net. I've told you I won't do it, insisted John. Pitch in, John, shouted someone from his bed in the clover. Give it to him in Dutch, that'll fetch him. Oh, hang it, said the corporal. Come on, man, what do you mean? You know you've got to do it. You've got to go. Ich hab dir zwei mal gesagt, ich dus es gar net. I have told you twice that I will certainly not do it. Ha ha! It beats the Dutch, said someone. Something rotten in Denmark, exclaimed another. Put him in the guardhouse, suggested the third, from under his gum blanket. Plague take the thing, said the corporal, perplexed. Pointer, continued he, put on your accoutrements again, get your gun, and take John, under arrest, to the adjutant. Come on, John, said Pointer, buckling on his belt, and be mighty quick about it, too. I don't want to stand about here arguing all night. I want to get to roost. Come along. The men leaned upon their elbows, in their beds on the clover, interested in knowing how John would take that. Well, said he, scratching his head, and taking his gun in hand, Corporal, ich glaub ich det besser. Corporal, I guess I'd better go. Yes, said Pointer, with a drawl. I guess you besser had, or the major'll make short work with you and your Dutch. What in the name of General Jackson did you come to the army for, if you ain't a-goin' to obey orders? If while we were lying in camp a man refused his duty, he was at once haled to the guardhouse, which is the military name for lockup. Once there, at the discretion of the officers, he was either simply confined and put on bread and water, or maybe ordered to carry a log of wood, or a knapsack filled with stones, 2 hours on and 2 off, day and night, until such a time as he was deemed to have done sufficient penance. In more extreme cases a court-martial was held, and the penalty of forfeiture of all pay due, with hard labor for 30 days, or the like, was inflicted. Tying up by the thumb was sometimes adopted. Down in front of Petersburg, out along the Weldon Railroad, I once saw 13 colored soldiers tied up by their thumbs at a time. Between 2 pine saplings, the long pole had been thrown across and fastened at either end about 7 feet from the ground. To this pole, 13 ropes had been attached at regular intervals, and to each rope a not very nice word for black people that was historically used, was tied by the thumb in such a way that he could just touch the ground with his heel and keep the rope taut. If anyone will try the experiment of holding up his arms in such a position for only 5 minutes, he will appreciate the force of the punishment of being tied up by the thumbs for half a day. In some regiments they had a high wooden horse, which the offender was made to mount, and there he was kept for hours in a seat as conspicuous as it was uncomfortable. One day, down in front of Petersburg, a number of us had been making a friendly call on some acquaintances over in another regiment. As we were returning home, we came across what we took to be a well, and wishing a drink, we all stopped. The well in question, as was usual there, was nothing but a barrel sunk in the ground, for at some places the ground was so full of springs that, in order to get water, all you had to do was to sink a box or barrel, and the water would collect of its own accord. Stooping down and looking into the well in question, Andy discovered a man standing in the well and bailing out the water. "What's he doing down there in that hole?" asked someone of our company. "He says he's in the gopher hole," said Andy with a grin. "Gopher hole? What's a gopher hole?" "Why," said the guard, who was standing nearby, and whom we had taken for the customary guard on the spring. "You see, comrades, our colonel has his own way of punishing the boys. One thing he won't let 'em do, he won't let 'em get drunk. They may drink as much as they want, but they must not get drunk. If they do, they go into the gopher hole. Jim there is in the gopher hole now. That hole has a spring in the bottom, and the water comes in pretty fast. And if Jim wants to keep dry, he's got to keep dipping all the time, or else stand in the water up to his neck. And Jim isn't so mighty fond of water, neither." Late in the fall of 1863, when we were lying in camp somewhere among the pine woods, along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, we were one day marched out to witness the execution of a deserter. Instances of desertion to the enemy's lines were extremely rare with us, but whenever they occurred, the unfortunate offenders, if caught, were dealt with in the most summary manner, for the doom of the deserter is death. The poor fellow who was to suffer the highest penalty of military law on the present occasion was, we were informed, a Maryland boy. Some months previously he had deserted his regiment for some cause or other, and had gone over to the enemy. Unfortunately for him, it happened that in one of the numerous skirmishes we were engaged in about that time, he was taken prisoner, in company with a number of Confederate soldiers. Unfortunately also for the poor fellow, it chanced that he was captured by the very company from which he had deserted. The disguise of a Confederate uniform, which might have stood him in good stead had he fallen into any other hands, was now of no avail. He was at once recognized by his former comrades in arms, tried by court-martial, found guilty, and sentenced to be shot. So, one October morning, orders came to the effect that the whole division was to turn out at 1 o'clock to witness the execution of the sentence. I need hardly say that this was most unwelcome news. Nobody wished to see so sad a sight. Some of the men begged to be excused from attendance, and others could not be found when our drums beat the assembly, for none could well endure, as they said, to see a man shot down like a dog. It was one thing to shoot a fellow mortal, or to see him shot in battle, but this was quite a different thing. A squad of men had been detailed to shoot the poor fellow, Elias Faust, of our company, being among the number. But Elias, to his credit be it recorded, begged off, and had someone else appointed in his stead. One could not help but pity the men who were assigned to this most unpleasant duty. For if it be painful only to see a man shot, what must it not be to shoot him with your own hand? However, in condescension to this altogether natural and humane aversion to the shedding of blood, and in order to render the task as endurable as possible, the customary practice was observed. On the morning of the execution, an officer, who had been appointed for the purpose, took a number of rifles, some 12 or 14 in number, and loaded all of them carefully with powder and ball, except one, this one being loaded with blank cartridge, that is, with powder only. He then mixed the gun so thoroughly that he himself could scarcely tell which guns were loaded with ball and which one was not. Another officer then distributed the guns to the men, not one of whom could be at all certain whether his particular gun contained a ball or not, and all of whom could avail themselves of the full benefit of the doubt in the case. It was one of these peculiarly impressive autumn days, when all that one sees or hears conspires to fill the mind with an indefinable feeling of sadness. There was the chirp of the cricket in the air, and the faraway chorus of the myriads of insects complaining that the year was done. There was all the impressiveness of a dull sky, a dreamy haze over the field, a yellow and brown tinge on the forest, accompanied by the peculiarly mournful wail of the breeze as it sighed and moaned dolefully among the branches of the pines, all joining in chanting a requiem, it seemed it to me, for the poor Maryland boy, whose sands were fast running out. At the appointed hour the division marched out and took position in a large field, or clearing, surrounded on all sides by pine woods. We were drawn up so as to occupy 3 sides of great hollow square, 2 ranks deep and facing inward, the 4th side of the square, where we could see that a grave had been recently dug, being left open for the execution. Scarcely were we well in position when there came to our ears, wafted by the sighing autumn wind, the mournful notes of the Dead March. Looking away in the direction whence the music came, we could see a long procession marching sadly and slowly to the measured stroke of the muffled drum. First came the band, playing the dirge, next the squad of executioners, then a pine coffin, carried by 4 men, then the prisoner himself, dressed in black trousers and white shirt, and marching in the midst of 4 guards, then a number of men under arrest for various offenses, who had been brought out for the sake of the moral effect it was hoped this spectacle might have upon them. Last of all came a strong guard. When the procession had come up to the place where the division was formed, and had reached the open side of the hollow square, it wheeled to the left and marched all along the inside of the line, from the right to the left, the band still playing the dirge. The line was long, and the step was slow, and it seemed that they never would get to the other end. But at long last, after having solemnly traversed the entire length of the three sides of the hollow square, the procession came to the open side of it, opposite to the point from which it had started. The escort wheeled off. The prisoner was placed before his coffin, which was set down in front of his grave. The squad of 12 or 14 men who were to shoot the unfortunate man took position some 10 or 12 yards from the grave, facing the prisoner, and a chaplain stepped out from the group of division officers nearby and prayed with and for the poor fellow a long, long time. Then the bugle sounded. The prisoner, standing proudly erect before his grave, had his eyes bandaged and calmly folded his arms across his breast. The bugle sounded again. The officer in charge of the squad stepped forward. Then we heard the command, given as calmly as if on drill. "Ready? Aim!" Then, drowning out the third command, "Fire!" came a flash of smoke and a loud report. The surgeons ran up to the spot. The bands and drum corps of the division struck up a quick step as the division faced to the right and marched past the grave. In order that in the dead form of its occupant we might all see that the doom of the deserter is death. It was a sad sight. As we moved along, many a rough fellow, from whom you would hardly have expected any sign of pity, pretending to be adjusting his cap so as to screen his eyes from the glare of the westering sun, could be seen furtively drawing his hand across his face and dashing away the tears that could not be kept from trickling down the bronzed and weather-beaten cheek. As we marched off the field, we could not help being sensible of the harsh contrast between the lively music to which our feet were keeping step and the fearfully solemn scene we had just witnessed. The transition from the dead march to the quick step was quite too sudden. A deep solemnity pervaded the ranks as we marched homeward across the open field and into the somber pine woods beyond, thinking as we went of the poor fellow's home, somewhere among the pleasant hills of Maryland, and of the sad and heavy hearts there would be there when it was known that he had paid the extreme penalty of the law. And that is the end of Punishments in Camp by Harry M. Kieffer. And here is the illustration from earlier again, in case you wanted to have a better look. I hope that you're having a great day.